I was playing with my DNA tangler thingamajiggy, and I realized that a good chunk of the human brain is devoted to the hand. We have lots of sensation in our fingertips, and so much of the brain is devoted to the hand. And at the same time, so much of society has been created by the human hand. We wouldn't be able to actually create this without our hands. So even if we had a thought of something, even if we were the same but didn't have these hands, we wouldn't actually be able to build anything that we thought about. So thought is strongly tied to the human hand in a way. Or it could be that we have so many thoughts because we're not actually using our hands creatively. We're only using them habitually. And then I was wondering if playing with this, which stimulates the hands, while talking about stuff and thinking about stuff and self-dialogue would actually help to grow the brain. In a way, extrapolating and learning in this way, plus doing this, might be a type of brain cross-training, because the brain cells devoted to the hands are being activated at the same time as the brain cells that are growing through new thoughts, new memes, epimemetics, endomemetics. So in a way too, it could possibly get those ideas into motion through the hands at some point in the future, because at least the hands have been firing at the same time as these insights. I have no idea if that's true, but I just remembered that a lot of the human brain is the human hand, and in a way everything's been created by the human hand. So in a way that the brain is the human hand and what it's created. But it also can create through just thinking and thoughts. And it's no wonder that we feel good when we're using our hands, because then we're not thinking so much because we're using our hands. So using the hands could be very important. And when that doctor talked about how touch actually stimulates circulation in the other person due to this electron thing that happens, well, if we think about how a lot of the human brain is devoted to the hand, we're actually really touching someone with our brain, a lot of our brain, when we're touching them with our hand. And then how does gesturing with the hands in a wave change the hand neurons in the brain? So if we're always just holding our hands like this for the rest of our life, they're going to get stuck like that in our brain too. Whereas if we're using our hands in a lot of different ways to wave, shake hands, hug, whatever else, then that's going to help our brain neuroplastically as well. I watched a TED Talk by Anne Herman Nettie, and she was talking about how the brain turns things into autopilot wiring. And I was thinking about how it's good to turn certain things into autopilot, like driving or different skills like that, but interacting with life, interacting with other human beings, we don't want to turn that into autopilot. We don't want to turn those into efficiencies, because that is like assuming we're interacting with a machine. And imagine if we could turn being super loving and kind into autopilot. So right now through our brain programs, we've turned separateness and division into autopilot. But what if we acted and responded to life with love? That requires not being on autopilot at all. But our autopilots have us stuck in habits that prevent us from connecting in those ways. And she says the trouble with autopilot is that when things change, we get caught off guard. And that's kind of a silly statement in a way, because things are always changing. And then when we finally notice something changed, we're caught off guard. So noticing that something changed could actually be a good thing. It could be a clue that we got out of autopilot for a moment. And she gave the example of trying to learn to use the other hand and how that can be draining, because those circuits haven't really been activated as much in the brain. Well, it's the same with map consciousness. We're trying to activate different circuits, and they're higher energy circuits, and it can be draining after a while being in that state of consciousness. So we do come back to ego consciousness, to habit consciousness, and we need to rest before we can move into that space again, into that space of infinite change, which life is infinite change. It's just because we're caught in habits, we don't notice, we don't see it. It's all there, it's all changing. We can change which bits of information we make salient, and the only way to do that is by not being caught in habit at all. The brain is trying to learn how to use the altruism and love and compassion pathways, and it can be frustrating in this world that's not designed to mirror those pathways back to the brain. Autopilot is our personal view, it's our personality when we're not learning. She talked about how we have 7.4 hours of screen time a day, or 3 months out of the year of screen time. And another TED Talk said we have 11 hours a day of screen time. Either way, I was thinking about how the screen can be utilized to grow the brain in a creative learning mode, or it can be used in order to put the brain in passive mode. So when the brain is in passive mode, it's off. It's pretty much sleeping. So for me, I'm using my screen for self-dialogue, and then to edit the dialogue as well. And I also use the screen to type up some of the things that I want to talk about. And so in that way, I'm using it as an extension of my brain to grow my brain. I'm not using it that much for passive things. I don't really watch any TV, except maybe once every month or two I'll sit down and spend a day watching movies on Netflix. But other than that, not really. So even if I watch a TED Talk, I'm actively engaged. I'm thinking of what I see from what they're saying. I'm thinking outside what they're saying, not just absorbing what they're saying. An example of autopilot would be, since I got my bidet, now autopilot gets me to pull the little lever to spray my butt, as opposed to reaching for the toilet paper. Now, that is something that is good to have as a reflex, as a choice of what I do. I don't want to actually do that in terms of things relating to humanity and the heart. If I don't talk about my TED Talk extrapolations right away, I sort of lose the flavor of what it was that I was extrapolating, slightly at least. So then I watched a TED Talk by Anthony Cheam, and he was saying if we had a notification on our computer screen saying a new version of the software is available for download, we would download it, or if we didn't, eventually the computer isn't working as well. So the software download is in order to keep everything running smoothly. And I actually think Mania and Map Consciousness is a software download. It downloads the new software of the map of reality to move towards oneness and love. And Mania, in a way, ends when we've downloaded all that we can download. And then we come back down to the level of society, and then we have that download in order to have it as software to inform our lives moving forward. And that goes with harvest your mania. Harvest that software download that we were given. And just as weight training is to grow muscle. Mania is neuroplastic training to change the brain, to see things in a different way. And we grow more brain cells and have more context so we can actually carry the universe, so we can actually move that world into manifestation. And he talked about accepting the terms and conditions of the download and how nobody reads it. And in a way, going into manic consciousness is accepting the terms and conditions of the download, but not reading the rules. And so we download it, and then we come back to this reality, and we didn't read the rules. But in a way, we can go back and we can harvest and we can understand some of the rules that we experienced in that other state of consciousness. So in a way, harvest, practice, embody is figuring out the terms and conditions that we were reading when we were in that state, but since we're back from that state, we don't have the terms and conditions anymore. So we have to actually move towards creating those terms and conditions within our neurology. And I think that was one of the terms and conditions of the download is I will be responsible for moving towards this in actuality. It probably says I promise to act this way and embody this even when the energy wears off. And I understand that it's my job to co-create heaven on earth even if other people can't see it or feel it. It's not just about watching lots of TV and creating heaven in the brain cells of the prefrontal cortex and being passively lulled into a waking sleep. And he said, make the conscious choice to deal with what's right in front of you. And this was just a quick statement he made. It wasn't something he was emphasizing. But my brain thought to itself, that's all we can really deal with is what's right in front of us. But we're so busy abstracting in our brains, and we put that in front of us. And it's not real, so we can't actually deal with that. We can only deal with what is right in front of us. And then I was starting to think about things like, what's right in front of us is what creates our life and creates our brain. For example, a TV right in front of me versus going for a walk in nature and having that in front of me. That is going to change my brain. And even what's underneath us. We could have the dirt of the earth on our feet, or we could be sitting on a couch. So what is in front of us and what is underneath us is partly what creates our brain. In the physical world, but we're so busy lost in our own mental world that we don't even really see what's really in front of us. But that's the only thing we can actually deal with is like what is right in front of us. But we can go on a path towards unfolding what we would like to be in front of us. But we can only do that by actually changing what's in front of us. We can't do that by rearranging thoughts in our brain. And by rearranging thoughts in our brain, we think we're doing something, but we're not. And I also thought of it in terms of aging. So if we always have a phone in front of us and then we're hunching forward and forward and forward, and eventually we're stooped over and our vertebrae fuse because that's what it does in order to prevent our head from falling between our feet, and that is going to age us. Or, as they say now, sitting is the leading cause of death. So if that's what's underneath us is a couch and what's in front of us is a TV, that is going to partly determine our longevity. And again, it's how we're orienting ourselves in the field of gravity. And even with things like, say, smoking cigarettes. Why is this cigarette right in front of me? Why is this alcohol right in front of me day after day? If it's not in front of us, it can't affect us. Watching too much of the news, like, why are we putting that in front of us? Why are we putting that in our awareness? Why are we putting that in our perceptual field? So mania tries to change what's in front of us. We can't sit still. We can't do the same thing. Everything's interesting. We're like a kid in a candy store. We're like one of those moths that can't look away from the light. We're interested in everything and we're just going everywhere. And by changing what's in front of us, we're changing our brains and we're seeing ourselves anew and feeling ourselves anew. It's spontaneous, it's random, it's synchronistic, it's intelligent. Why does that energy want us to put different things in front of us? It wants us to see different things. It wants us to experience different things. We've created our life by what we put in front of us. Mania changes our programmed habitual way of being, of going in circles, both physically and mentally, to being on a pathless path, a path with no path. It's a path of just perceiving moment to moment and seeing what that unfolds. And after the download is complete, sometimes we need to restart. And I watched a TED Talk by Scott Ellie, and I made a note of wondering, how do we create with time? Because they say, how do you use your time? How do you spend your time? How do you create your time? How do you create with time? Because right now we're spending time, we're not creating with time. And in a way, it's by what we put in front of us, even what we put in front of us in our perceptual field, through our mind screen. Say jealousy, perhaps. That's how we're creating with our time. We're creating jealousy with our time. We're creating hate with our time. We're creating anger with our time. That puts things into a different perspective than just saying, I am angry. I'm creating time with anger, and each one of us has the same amount of time in a day. And people that are creating that time as anger are putting that into the field of space-time that we all share. And that in itself is that level of consciousness, and it's additive in that level of consciousness. I feel map consciousness is course correction software. It changes how we approach what's in front of us. And that's a good question. How do we approach what's right in front of us? I feel that map consciousness is intelligence trying to come online. And so an experience of mania would be exercising intelligence. And I thought of how a way to measure screen time is that if a person utilizes the screen and is able to extrapolate something, their own insights, not just recall what the person said, but see some kind of connection or some kind of higher thought from that thought, then it's not necessarily wasted time. It's actually time that has created something else. It's time that creates something new in our neurology or within our brain, as opposed to passively absorbing what was already said. Somebody already created that sentence and said it. Now, if we can create a new thought or word or sentence from what it is that we absorb, and we can extrapolate from that, then time has just actually been amplified in a way, because it's amplified in our brain. We saw something new. And when we see something new, that's mirrored in our brains. And I feel like that is what could warp space-time, is when we see something new, and that changes our brain. But if we're just seeing and absorbing and not actually extrapolating, not critically thinking or lateral thinking, then we're just actually we're not evolving consciously. We're being used, we're being drained, we're not being creative. So if a person says, well, I'm going to watch 2 hours less TV a day, and the TV that I do watch, I'm going to extrapolate, then it could actually be a vehicle to higher consciousness and brain cell growth, as opposed to not. Because the thing with technology is we can access a lot more information, and I was watching some TED Talks that talk about how we don't actually change ourselves based on TED Talks or anything. And I think part of it is that we're not extrapolating. We're just smiling and nodding. Because we've gotten to this place where we think learning is just listening, when it's really actually seeing the beyond of what's being said. But we have been trained out of seeing the beyond. And every now and then we see the beyond, we're like, wow, I'm such a genius. Well, genius is being able to do that all the time. And I think the brain gets fatigued because we're not extrapolating. I could probably do this all day long and I wouldn't lose energy. But when we're just passively absorbing, we're being drained. Whereas when we're making new connections, we're getting blood flow to our brain, extra blood flow, and that's going to give the brain energy. There's a difference between thinking with what somebody is saying and just listening. He also had a quote that said, when it gets ripe, you have to make it fall. And I would say sometimes it falls on its own, and that wasn't his quote, but I was thinking about how if a fruit falls from a tree when it's ripe, someone can either pick it up right away and eat it, or it might actually grow a whole new tree. It might actually grow a whole new world, which is the tree. And I was thinking about how when the brain gets to that high point in mania and then it falls, it's almost like it's this ripened fruit, and it can either get eaten or it can grow a new tree. I feel like our brains are seeds. They're seeds of consciousness. So when we get to that ripest point and then we fall back down, now we're not just the fruit, we're the whole tree. What I'm trying to say is, even as human beings on this earth, we think when we reach adulthood that that's our peak. That adulthood that we reach could just be a seed for a different level of humanity that we don't even understand yet. Because it's interesting, we get to that high point and then we fall, just like a fruit with seeds. And so I think when we fall back to this reality, we're seeds for that other reality. We have to move towards it. We're the seed. We have that whole tree, the whole blueprint of the tree within us, and we can grow that tree. Right now what happens is that the pharmaceutical company just comes along and eats our fruit, and our seeds never get planted.